Hi, and welcome to the third session in the Chamber Foundation Sustainability Summit Series, Collaborating for Impact. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stephanie Potter. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainability and Circular Economy Program at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. The sessions that have happened in this series and will happen culminating next week are reviewing sustainability priorities in the context of the current landscape and diving more deeply into how to progress these strategies. And today's session is designed to do exactly that. It'll focus on creative, efficient, and inclusive collaboration across sectors and silos as a way to accelerate impact. And it will highlight unique and replicable partnerships to solve unprecedented sustainability challenges through collective action. This conversation is being recorded and participants are in listen-only mode. We invite everyone to submit questions via the chat box. We will try and find time for them today in the conversation. If not, we will find many more places to answer them in the coming year as we continue to explore these topics that will be discussed today. Without further ado, I do want to turn it over to our great panel. I am going to welcome Jenna Jambeck, who's our moderator and contributor to today's conversation, representing National Geographic's Sea to Source initiative and her work at University of Georgia College of Engineering. With her will be our panelist, Steve Schmidta, strategic advisor to the Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy, which is PACE, and Jenna Holberg-Benj, General Manager of John Deere Reman, Sophie Thornander, Program Manager of Circular Economy and Transformation at Philips, and Ledwin Coleman, Vice President for Solar Development and Operations at Groundswell. So without further ado, over to you, Jenna.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's great to be here. I'm going to give a little bit of context, I think, from my perspective before everyone's going to be asked to kind of talk about their perspective. And so I've been working in environmental engineering, specializing in solid waste about 24 years and 19 looking at marine debris, which has really become plastic pollution. And I wanted to talk about, collaborations related to our source to sea work within National Geographic, which focused in the Ganges River Basin all last year. And we were looking at the flow, load, and composition of plastic within this river system, and collecting a lot of science in new rapid methods. And for me, my work, and this work specifically, is science to inform decision makers. And I think in a lot of cases we think of decision makers as only the government. But I want people to think about, I've had lots of companies and folks come to me, with this issue thinking, what can we do? And they want to make decisions, have priorities, look at investments based upon science. So again, this collaboration stretches, well beyond, the intersection of different companies, different stakeholders. And I really look forward to the perspectives and the diversity on the panel that we have today. So I'm going to start with you, Lenwood. You're in my upper left. Can you sort of give me an introduction to yourself and sort of your perspective, on this topic today?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ledwin Coleman, as you all know. I'm with Groundswell, and I'm a Washingtonian, so I love my city. And with that, the Groundswell approach is that of building communities. Solar and green space are extremely important in the world we live in today, but we also realize in our low moderate income communities, it's about education, it's about job, and it's about building companies. So we bring that platform as a groundswell perspective to all that we do in the district and throughout the country.
Great. Great. You were breaking up there at the last minute, so I just wanted to make sure you were finished. So Jenna, can you talk about, introduce yourself and talk about the perspective from your angle as well?
Sure, of course. Thanks, Jenna, and thanks for joining today, everybody. Like Stephanie said, I'm the general manager of our John Deere remanufacturing operations. So we have distribution globally, and we produce engines, transmissions, hydraulic components, electronics. We remanufacture those. We take failed parts and we make them like new again. But I also represent and the vice chair of our Remian Industries Council and lead our Remian Association Alliance. So not only from a John Deere perspective and the partnerships that we forged to create our business 20 years ago when we started joint ventures with several companies, but also from my role in the Remian Industries Council, I know firsthand why and how partnerships can be so powerful. And I truly believe, and I think it'll be a great conversation today, of why that is, why it's so important to overcome our common challenges through those partnerships. So that's my perspective, Jenna. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's nice that you bring both a perspective of working for a company, but also associated with those different associations, because I think those, you know, sort of pre-competitive associations are going to be really important to sort of moving the needle in the circular economy space.
Absolutely.
Let's move to you, Steve. Can you please introduce yourself and your organization and how it fits in here?
Sure. So my name's Steve Schmida. My day job is I'm the founder and chief innovation officer of Resonance, which is a global development and corporate sustainability consulting firm. But the reason I'm here today is I am a member of the leadership group of the Platform to Accelerate the Circular Economy, or PACE, which is a platform for leaders in business, government, and civil society to come together to learn, to share, and to really push forward on action around the circular economy. And for resident, you know, the collaboration piece is something I'm particularly passionate about. This is something that I think is essential to the circular economy. And you know, I recently published a book on how to do these types of partnerships, and one of the case studies I feature in the book is around the circular economy, precisely because it is so challenging and it's so important. So really looking forward to the conversation today. Great.
Thanks, Steve. And Sophie, thanks for joining us today. Can you introduce yourself? I know Philips has, I saw it as one of the companies that was initially featured in some of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation materials when they first started this work. So yeah, share your perspective with us.
Yes, thank you, Jenna. So Sophie from Philips. For those who don't know, we're a health technology company. I think many may associate us with the light bulbs that we started over 100 years ago. But we did divest that a couple of years back, and the focus of our company now is really on health and well-being of people. Maybe just to add a little bit, because it's been a very exciting week for us. Just this Monday, we also reinforced our commitments as a company to be purpose-led, right, and really announced a fully integrated approach to doing business responsibly and sustainably. And I think here, partnerships or collaboration in general is really key, because I think we as a company, we strongly believe in driving global change, and we can only do that with others, right? So whether it is our suppliers, our customers, governments, NGOs, and I think it's even about collaboration within the organization itself, right? Because it's the people within our systems that create the change that, you know, we want to see.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to dive into some of those aspects as we further the conversation. But first, I'm going to pass it back to Steve. I think, you know, you really have some good data points, you know, with all the partners that you've been able to get connected and seen sort of firsthand, I think, what success looks like in some of these collaborations. So can you maybe elaborate on some of what you see are the sort of the critical ingredients for successful collaborations?
Sure. You know, I think there are probably about a half dozen, I think, really key ingredients that you see in successful partnerships. The first and foremost, and this will seem relatively obvious, but it can't be overstated, is trust, right? If there's not a certain level of trust amongst the partners that they're around a shared goal, nothing's going to happen. The second that I think is often overlooked are quick wins, right? Partnerships often take a long time to pull together. You've got to pull together organizations with very different backgrounds, very different mandates. And sometimes it takes so long to do that we lose sight of the fact that the partnership is meant to create change in the world. And to do that, you need to create some momentum. So you see, I think most successful partnerships will bake in a couple of quick wins to get something on the board to create a little bit of momentum around them. The third is accountability, right? And that's accountability to your partners. That's accountability to your external stakeholders. And then, often neglected, but to Sophie's point, accountability to your internal stakeholders, right? There are folks with equities in these partnerships across organizations, and they're impacted both positively and sometimes presented with challenges. And so making sure that we hold ourselves accountable. And then, robust project management. It's a topic most of our organizations are very familiar with, but again, sometimes it gets neglected. And a good successful partnership is ultimately anchored in some form of project management. And then lastly, I think it's about relationships and communications. And this is a little bit different than trust, right? Where you need to be over communicating with your partners probably early on. But then there needs to be the ability inside the partnership to resolve the inevitable bumps in the road. And sometimes those bumps are small, sometimes they're quite large, sometimes they're totally exogenous to the partnership, but impact it, like a global pandemic, right? Or the quest for social and racial justice, right? These can, these impact collaborations. And I think by having that communication, by having those strong relationships, you can really see how successful partnerships can pull through some of those challenges and get where they need to go. So those are just a few initial thoughts.
Great. I saw some of your fellow panelists nodding their heads. And I'm curious to open it up to the other panelists. Do you have a specific example that you could give us from your company or from your group that you think you used these ingredients and it was a success?
Well, on Philip's side, so one of the coalitions that we're driving is the Capital Equipment Coalition. So this came up from the 2018 pledge in Davos, right, where 9 companies actually committed to, we're going to close the loop on our capital equipment, right? And I think many of the points that Steve is really raising is really to the point. I mean, that is what is bringing back, bringing together these companies, right, around a common purpose, right, a shared goal that, as Steve was mentioning. And I think also the trust, right, what I personally very much appreciate in these in the coalition sessions that we have is really the willingness to learn and be open and share, right? What are your challenges, right? What are the mistakes? Because other people can also learn from your mistakes. What are the best practices that have gotten the organization moving, right? And one thing also triggered by what you were mentioning on project management there, Steve, right? I think what's helped us is that one of our partners is a circle economy. So that's one of a Dutch NGO, right? And they're really driving, putting together, doing the project management, facilitating all our workshops, right? Because all the companies are in, delivering their inputs, right? But they're setting up the bi-weekly meetings, the sessions, etc. And you need somebody to be in the driving seat to put everything together. So, and again, the personal relationships, I think that's also very important. And also even in our last session, we even had small breakout groups. We had to do it virtually, right? To make sure that we could have our coffee moments with each other, etc. Because that kind of, that's also that creates the bond to want to help each other, and share and accelerate change in that sense.
Well, I think you brought up a good point, Sophie, in terms of, I heard you mention overcoming challenges, so maybe let's circle to that. Of course, if you have a good example as you're answering this, you can tie that in. But let's think about, what have some of those challenges been as you're kind of moving down this path, and how did you overcome them?
I think so. One example that's very concrete is also, how do we talk about the value that we create in the circular economy, right? And it's also, what is a circular economy, right? If you look at companies, every company have quite different perspectives, and they measure it also quite differently in that sense. And on specifically on the value driver, what we did is we went together and we put our minds together to say, okay, what is the value that circular economy is actually bringing us as a company? And we created a value driver framework that is also now used as within PACE, right? So it's really helping to create that kind of common language. Because I think in circularity particular, we really need that common language.
Yep. I think that's a great point. And so Lenwood, I want to talk to you because your organization, you're trying to kind of do two things at once, you know, deploying the clean energy projects and help decarbonize and benefit the underserved community, excuse me. So what, have you had any specific challenges kind of, you know, with that, and what kind of collaborators have helped you overcome those challenges?
Very good question. And yes, we have. And working in low moderate income communities, you always are challenged with them being very cautious of who a newcomer might be. As you would understand, many times folk or companies or organizations overpromise. And with that, there is a numbness and a defensive nature as you walk into a community. What we have learned is to partner and think about the simplisticness of going to a church, going to a community center, a recreation center. And through those leadership roles, you get the trust of the community. The community is always looking for how can they be enhanced or improved, but they're always skeptical of what is being brought to them and are there for other reasons besides the community. So what we have found is we get the nonprofit organizations who are mission aligned, our favorite word wherever we go, because that breaks down the barriers. And it opens up a perception of we can trust this at least in the opening stages. And what we have learned, like companies like My Community Foundation, chambers of commerce, and then using public TV and radio, we build a level of trust. And then we come in with more than just let's put solar on your roof. We train you, we educate you, we go into your schools, your children know us. So when you build those types of networks, it allows us to reach even deeper in providing services to the community that improve the environment as well as the community they live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really touched on, you know, I think one of the things that Steve brought up at the beginning, which was trust. And then how do you build that? How do you build that trust? Because it's not, you know, not just a given. And I think you're really speaking to these authentic, you know, relationships. You know, you're being very authentic in the collaboration, right? So it's not just a superficial collaboration. You're embedding yourself in the community. And so, Jenna, I think you have some good examples from within John Deere, I think, that are these authentic collaborations. Wondering if you can elaborate on one or two of those.
Sure, Jenna. You know, I was also thinking about our industry from a remanufacturing perspective. It's small. It makes up about 2% of total manufacturing worldwide. So $160 billion, 450,000 people, but that's really tiny compared to manufacturing. We represent 12 different sectors, from printer cartridges to heavy duty, you know, engines, right? 1,100 pound engines. So that disparity in the industry also creates, you know, we have to overcome that together. We have to tackle challenges like how do we ship parts across borders? How do we identify cleaning material that doesn't, you know, deteriorate the parts when we do that and is environmentally friendly? How do we apply innovation that collectively solves those problems? And so anyway, from an industry perspective, I was just thinking about that as you were talking, Lenwood, as well, that it's an industry problem. It's not just a John Deere problem. So we've got to come together to solve that. And then from a John Deere perspective, the one example that I would share that's been really instrumental in our learning and then through collaboration is the Remade Institute. So that's a Department of Energy funded program, universities, national labs, industry. And we do exactly that. We apply research, we apply techniques to solve those problems. And so design for the REX type, you know, approach. So how do we design for the environment? Or how do we design in preparation for those failure modes we're going to see on the parts that we're remanufacturing? That's a good example where we leverage that heavily to not only educate our engineers and myself as an example, but also solve problems together. And I think really necessary kind of collaboration that occurs in our industry.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of cross-sector collaboration, and of course, for me, I like to hear the collaboration in the science. And even when we first met, you were talking about doing like life cycle assessments and collecting a lot of data on what you're doing, which I think again bridges those gaps in terms of bringing on other collaborators, and again providing information for your company, but others maybe to make decisions, kind of as I said at the beginning. So let's see. So I think, Sophie, you brought up internal collaboration. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit on that as well, how important that is.
Maybe to give a concrete example, right? So we believe also that if we really want to take circularity to the next level in our propositions, I think it's very important to really co-create with relevant parts of the organization. So we're currently doing that now specifically for services, but also in the digital realm, which is quite an unknown area, right? And I think what I'm really learning in this process is that just by getting together with the experts for services and digital, right? I mean, the expertise and knowledge that they have on the topic, and if you fuse that together, with a sustainability hat as well, I mean, the impact that you can create, it's just goes way beyond. And I think I'm personally blown away by just, how really the added value of getting together with experts within your organization, right? And then I think the other aspect is also, I think if you look at how sustainability has been driven within our organization over the past few years, it's really been concentrated to a couple of individuals, in a central group called sustainability, right? And we're realizing more and more that, with the ambitious goals that we have, that is not enough, right? We need to really grow this family, right? And build a huge network of ambassadors. And that's really one of the key focus areas going forward for us, right? To really help extend this ambassador network, in many different ways, building communities of practices on specific topics like, let's say, recycled plastics, where, we create a safe environment for people to share learnings, connect on challenges as well, right? And connect, because we're a huge organization of 80,000 employees. How can you make sure that somebody has a similar challenge in Japan, right? Connects with the right person in North America. So those are things. It's also very important to have the right tools, that provide people access with the right information, getting together, getting visibility of what's going on. So those are really key for us. And I think, because I have a little bit of a product background development, so I'm very used to developing propositions for our consumers. But I think what we're doing now is really also developing a proposition for our employees, right? Bringing them across this learning journey, right? From really being aware, right? To really translating, okay, how do I contribute as an individual towards, our sustainability ambitions, towards teaming up with others, building your competences around it, and really helping to create that movement that we really need.
Yep, that's a really great point. I think a lot about that, when I was, when I first published some of my work and people were like, oh my goodness, we really have, an issue with plastic. How do we manage it? An exponential increase. And then I think, just the concept of circular economy came about, and people were like, this is it. This is what we need to do. But what does that really mean? And that's why this discussion is important. How do we move from these concepts that sound amazing to action? And so, Steve, I'd like you were nodding your head when Sophie was talking, but I think the other thing I think she brought up that is kind of interesting is moving to digital, right? So right now, have there been specific challenges, and how have those been overcome by various collaborations? How do you still collaborate in the new environment we're in, which is, all digital for the most part in these COVID times? So I guess those are kind of 2 points, but if you have things to add on both of those, I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, no, happy to. And I think, Sophie, just building on the internal piece, a key element of that as well, in addition to the tools, is if you can have executive ownership and sponsorship, right? Like Philips, your CEO, has made a massive commitment to the circular economy, both with PACE, but just more generally.
My hero.
Yeah, and that executive level sponsorship is really critical. I think then when we get down to the current situation that we're in, right, where we're all virtual, I think as it's come up, I think looking for those informal moments to help build relationships. You can't just go into a Zoom call with an agenda and build trust. You might need that Zoom call, you might need that agenda, but you probably need to maybe do a pre-call or a post-call. Can you get to know this person? And I think particularly inside of organizations, understand, what are their KPIs, right? Because it could be something that the things they're being measured on are contradictory or run into conflict, right, with some of the things that are on the circular agenda. And so, I think that's really key. The other piece that I want to highlight, that where PACE is really trying to make a contribution here, is around PACE. The leaders around PACE are about to launch 10 calls to action, right, where we can help bring folks together around specific action-based collaborations that need to happen in order for circularity to really start to take off. And I think those sorts of, that's a tool that not only does it have value in and of itself, but it's the type of thing that a sustainability leader in a company can bring to their leaders, right, and say, look, we can do this. There's others, there's others in our industry or our competitors, and we need to be out in front on this. So those are sort of different ways I think, you can tackle this.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you jumped a little ahead. We're going to hear from everyone on specific calls to action, but I think that's great to touch on that right now. So I want to maybe get into the weeds a little bit in terms of partnerships, thinking about your supply chain. And I think this is for Groundswell, Philips, and John Deere. Can you think of any specific partnerships along the whole supply chain that have sort of accelerated your outcome? Or has there been any specific challenges along that, just because, you do have a large network of folks? And I think Jenna touched on this a little bit when you were talking. But yeah, do you have any thoughts or good examples to share with the community there? You got it.
Are you going to go first, Jamie?
Oh, you are. It seems like you might still be muted. I thought you unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
I'm trying my best on the audio. This is fun, right?
No problem.
Okay. So two examples from my perspective. So from a supply-based perspective, we've seen a lot of OEs as well as independent remanders get into the business and get into the business globally. So we're a more mature market here in the US, but globally that's not been the case. That is helping us a ton as we consider and grow our business in Europe, as an example, or in Latin America. It's closer proximity to the customer. It's reducing our carbon footprint. We're not shipping parts all over the globe, to get them back to remanufacture. So that's a really big deal for us. And I would encourage more to, get into the business as a result. The second is really our dealers and our customers that act as collaborators with us. If we don't get that core or that raw material back from them, that failed part, we don't have a business. It's really important that not only the transportation logistics between us, the price of that, that part, all of that has to make sense for them and has to add value to their business as well. And I think we're seeing that more and more, that customers value the fact that they're contributing to sustainability as well by reusing those parts, by reusing that material. So that's a really important aspect of the partnership with our customers.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, so Lenwood, I think you had something that you were going to say related to supply chain as well.
Sure. I do. Solar was new for me when I came in to the industry a few years ago. Michelle Moore, who is our CEO for Groundswell, convinced our team of what it meant to be visionaries in regards to solar energy. When we make partners, I will always use the first word, mission aligned. Our partners start from the top all the way down to the community because you must have that link all the way through. So if we have funders, if we have local government funding, if we have private funding, all of them are partners. And with it, they must see our vision in order for us to be successful. The next step or tier that would come under them would be, who do we work with to make sure we provide the quality of service that is required to keep our credibility and our vision intact? That would be our EPCs. That would be, or as we would say, engineer procurement, construction and procurement. We would make sure that they're mission aligned. And what does that mean to us? It means that you work in the community, you train in the community, you give something back besides just doing your job. And that is important. So all our materials support that. You can't get a contract with Groundswell unless you are mission aligned and show that you have a true vision of supporting and improving the community. Then you look at what are the things that bring us into the community and give us credibility. They're the agencies who have shown themselves over years to be supportive and have done quality projects and services. We align with them. So when we walk in the door, barriers are already been broken before we come in. Then you want to make sure that when you do the visual and the audio components, you're looking at the right radio stations, the right TVs, the right chambers that connect to those communities. Whenever I make a presentation as the Vice President of Groundswell, my goal is development and operations, but I do homework. I know the community before I walk in the room. I know some of the issues that impact that community. So I'm not just talking solar. You have your returning citizens, low, moderate income communities, their challenge. We show a method in which they can train and make a livable wage. Now, what have I done? I have bound the whole chain that everyone's playing and feels some value when we come to the table. Those are the key components I find that have been extremely successful. And we're in 9 states or 8 states, Hawaii, New York, Chicago, the DMV area, Georgia. And so you have a different flavor wherever you go. So you come in well learned about that community in order to make sure you put yourself in the best position to serve.
Mm-hmm. I think those are outstanding points. I think to have, and we kind of talked about the authentic partnerships, but you need to have that aligned, ethics, vision, goals, all of those things. I think those probably are some of those when we were talking about the right ingredients for successful partnerships, because people are on the same page in many regards just from the get-go, sort of as you said. And your work in the community in terms of doing your background research really resonates with my work as well. So we're looking at doing co-collaborating with communities to collect data about their circularity, and the same kind of thing. You don't just walk, it's context sensitive. You have to be context sensitive. Also excited to hear that you're here in Georgia. So be fun to see where your projects are within the state, how close they are to me. That's something we might be able to get to. Can't get around the world, but really appreciate, I think, those messages. Go ahead.
I was just saying that I will be in Georgia next week for a week.
Nice. Yes. Well, hopefully the rain will be stopped by then. Sophie, do you have anything to share, any thoughts from the supply chain side for yours?
Yeah, maybe one interesting example I'd like to highlight, right? It's also, how we can help suppliers to actually drive demand for recycled plastic. So recently we committed to quadrupling our use of recycled plastics by 2025 as a part of a bigger new plastics economy, kind of a global commitment. So this is under the PACE umbrella. And I think how this helps the supply chain is that it gives suppliers actually certainty of demand, right? And they can then that helps to mobilize their resources to deliver on it, right? So it's the same thing when we invest in how do you say, co-invest in wind farms, right? That's also under very long-term agreements, but then, the wind, the operators, they have that certainty. We have a customer for X amount of years that will help to justify the investment that we're making for it. So I think that kind of, it's also a way of collaborating, right, towards creating impact.
Mm-hmm. And the materials flow world is so dynamic in terms of pricing and markets. And so anything you can do to collaborate to make that more consistent, where people can rely on that, they know, that source of income or that contract is, there's going to be a need there so they can keep operating. I see that on the ground all the way to the waste picker. So our work in India, we interviewed the folks on the ground, picking through the landfill, finding recyclable materials, in the environment on the ground, and talking about the volatility of that pricing sort of at the kabadi wala or the junk shop. What you're talking about has an impact all the way back to that, to that side of things, certainly within places that have a large informal recycling sector as well. So I actually think about that in terms of how that can, how their livelihoods can be improved, and, dignity and inclusion of those folks, when we're thinking about, I know at the corporate level, these systems, but it goes all the way across to that as well. So let's think about, I think it's about, we could start circling to some of that, call to action, next steps and things like that. So, Steve referred to that before, but Jenna, let's circle back to you in terms of what would you say, you would want folks to do? I think we all sort of have this goal of expanding this community. I think we need to expand it more within the U.S. And so I was really excited that we're hosting this, panel. And so how would we do that? What should folks do if they feel like they want to participate, but, what is their next step?
Yeah, there's so many problems to solve and so many challenges to overcome. Just get engaged, right? Be passionate about it. And that's in your work life, but also in your personal life, right? I think we need to support it all the way through. And so just getting engaged, specifically in our industry and with John Deere, there's some really easy ways to get plugged in, and that's through through councils like the Reman Industries Council. But I'd also encourage, I think, OEMs out there, we've got to invest heavily in that circularity, in remanufacturing, in ways that we can reuse our materials and think about the whole life cycle of the product, from the minute that we design it through, the time that it dies, right? And so, I think we all need to invest in that, and then through this collaboration that we talked about, the councils and other institutes are great ways to do that.
Great, yeah, I think absolutely the system is shifting to people thinking about end of life when they're designing products, when, you're thinking about packaging, and in your case, entire, mechanical systems and, tractors and, things. I don't think, for me, and I grew up in the Midwest with farm equipment all around me, but I don't think I had ever thought really about the remanufacturing. So it's really been a pleasure to hear more about all the good work that you all are doing. So Lenwood, what would you say a good call to action would be to folks who are hoping to, enter this space or increase their engagement? I think you're on mute. Maybe. Can't hear you.
I would say that as question is a good one again. You must be committed. This work is not easy work, and it calls for all kinds of hours of the day. Understand what element or segment of the work really fits you so that you can give 100% of yourself to it. In dealing with clean energy and dealing with low moderate income communities, clearly understand they can tell when they're being sold a bill of goods. And it doesn't take them long because they work in they live in an environment where they're challenged every day. When we go in front of them, the biggest, I guess, charge I would get or our team at Groundswell would get is when they come up and say, hey, thank you for coming. That thank you tells you a lot about how many hours you put in before you got in front of that community and how quickly they will embrace all of the activities and services you want to bring. But you must know your place. Some people don't belong in the community. They belong behind the scenes. So find what your niche is, be sure of your commitment, and then stay true to it. If you can do those things, you make the most impact in this environment that we live in today.
I like that. Thank you. Sophie, what would you say your call to action would be for folks wanting to engage more, expand their work in this space?
I think it's partly about, identifying the people or the entities that you really need to be able to drive change, right? Because it's sometimes driving just change in silos can be very challenging. So in here, I think, finding the right people, right? And then another thought would be around experimentation, right? So I think it's more important that we try to learn by doing, because if in many cases, we're trying to achieve systemic impact, right? And I think if we spend too much time like thinking theoretically what's going to happen, right? So if we change our business model, what's going to happen, right? Will consumers accept our new business model or not, right? Just learn, start, do a pilot, right? Does it resonate, right? What did you learn from it? And use that to kind of enrich. So I think really working minimum viable, lean startup, whatever you call it, right? I think that's something also, I think to drive change, we need to have that kind of mentality.
Great. And Steve, I want to give you a chance to elaborate. I mean, you brought up this call to action, but what would you, what are the things that you would say we would prioritize for as a call to action for folks to expand their engagement here?
I mean, I think there's, if you think about the individual level, I think Sophie and Jenna and Len would, brought up a number of examples. I think if we think at the organizational level and beyond, one area that I think is critically important, I suspect this will be front of mind for Jenna and Sophie to a greater or lesser degree, is around trade, right? There are some real significant barriers around trade in circular products, reuse of products, and those barriers existed for good reasons. They're not, they were put in historically. But if we really want to get the flywheel moving, right, this is an area where the chamber organizations like PACE and the World Economic Forum and others can really try to help get this on the agenda a little bit, and help elevate. So that's certainly an area I think where the group on this call and the institutions represented on this call can really think about anyway, or start to think about.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to have everybody's perspective on, so I think hopefully all of the audience members have been able to take something from that fits with theirs, with their situation. So we have a couple questions from the audience, and we have some time to be able to take those. So I'm gonna ask these and open it up to folks. So the first one is, how can sustainable startups grow? So we really didn't, I think, Sophie, you just said lean startup in your last answer. But I think maybe thinking, that was about the mentality of what a lean startup does. But how can sustainable startups grow or build their recognition with consumers or supply chains? New companies. I think we've been giving a lot of advice to companies that exist, but does anyone have advice for a new company trying to grow in this space?
Well, I'll speak real quick because we're very proud of what we have accomplished. Groundswell has been in place since 2009. And with that, with the goals that we've put in place over the last 3 to 4 years, we've created a couple of EPCs. And I'm always getting in trouble for using acronyms, but engineering, procurement, and construction. And with it, we made sure that we built portfolios for them. In the market that we're in today, there are very few minorities that can actually compete for the contracts for clean energy as we see today. So unless you take a special interest and help cultivate, sometimes it takes a little time, but if there's a commitment, we're willing to do the time. And what we do from every project that we go into the churches, we go into the communities, and we provide them with opportunities to train. And for small businesses, a construction company can quickly evolve to EPC. Come and put in some grunt work, as we call it. And then let us help you get that certification to take you to the next level, because it's all about hours and service. So we make an effort where we go to create that new and small business and employ within the communities. Saves a lot of damage in construction and cost when you have a commitment of the community looking out over across a window or a door or outside the church saying, hey, don't mess with that. This is how you build your network and you create more revenue streams wherever you go.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Jenna, I know you said you were trying to expand internationally. Are any of the new, those folks, startups that you're trying to support? You said that if you don't have to, ship parts around the world, are you trying to get remanufacturing hubs around the world? How is there advice based upon trying to do that, or what works well for that? Or
I would say we're seeing more of the established companies that typically do new parts get into the remanufacturing business globally. So it's not necessarily a startup in that case, but certainly they are leveraging the expertise of us as well as our other partners to do that, because they may not be knowledgeable about remanufacturing. In terms of a new startup, though, a couple of things that I think about are you still have to be relevant to your whoever your customer is, right? Whether it's the community or a customer that you're selling to. But two, don't reinvent the wheel. We have some great organizations like PACE, like RIC, like other organizations that they can be a part of and learn from. And I can tell you, getting into my industry a few years ago, I leveraged those really heavily to get up to speed and shorten that learning curve. So that would be my only other thoughts and advice.
Great. Sophie, great. I was just going to say.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to say something building on what Jenna was saying about relevance, right? So I think for any startup, you really need to think about what's the tension that you're solving for your customer, right? Are you really delivering on a unique need, right? And how do you as a startup differentiate compared to what's out there? Because I think, without that and having that in mind, I think it's difficult to get people to invest in you, right? I think also, it's not just about having something sustainable out there. That's just not gonna do the trick, right? You need to be unique in that sense. And also, if you really want to have mass, really adopt sustainability, right? Think about what is then also the added benefits to your customers, right? From actually going for you and not for somebody else. Mm-hmm. Then I think, more and more investors are really looking to invest in sustainability in general, right? So I think at least, going forward, the path should be easier for startups in that sense.
Great. Steve, do you have any thoughts? Does it make sense for startups to try to join some of the larger, networks and organizations, or is that spreading themselves too thin at first? Should they be more established before they do that, or does it make sense to even just build their network from the get-go?
I mean, look, I think as somebody who founded a company and grew it, I think you always have to make these trade-offs, right? But I think, being selective in the networks that you're building, I think is key, right? Because every moment you spend networking is one less moment you might spend less on product development, or you might spend less on marketing and that sort of thing. So I think that's really key. But I think, to Sophie's point around capital, right? So what's been great now, within the PACE framework is recently we've had more capital providers start to come in. And even folks like closed loop partners, which is funding, early stage startups, right? That I don't think 5-10 years ago anybody was funding early stage startups around circularity, right? And now all of a sudden there is money, there is capital to be deployed, and maybe it's still early days, but that's sort of my take on it. And again, I think it's a balancing act, but engaging with a few key platforms, whether that's your local chamber, a big platform like PACE, global platform like PACE, depending on where you play, right? If you're playing in your community, PACE may not be the best place for you. It may be the local chamber, right? So I think just calibrating to your market.
I think that's great, and glad you brought up like closed loop, and through I think the results of some of our work through National Geographic and other global work, we're working with like the Circulate Initiative and Circulate Capital, and certainly those kind of networks are, incubation and funding are so important for startups, I think, within this space, and hopefully more resources will continue to be put there for folks to grow. So I wanted to thank all of you. I'm going to try to summarize some of this up, some of the key messages that I heard, but this was such a great conversation. So many, I think, great and diverse perspectives. I like how we started out thinking about trust, and really building that through the partnerships, working with people who have aligned visions. I think that's quite important to the magic ingredients to what a successful partnership is. Open mind, open to learning and changing, but yet having a common language across all of the, diverse players within the partnership that you have. How things have moved to digital, and that is, maybe it's expanded some of our partnerships because you have the ability to meet with more. This has happened to me. My partnerships have been actually enhanced somewhat by people getting used to being visual, so I haven't had to travel. Well, I can't travel. So in some ways that people have gotten used to this, and so our partnerships have actually gotten enriched some. And then, of course, there's limitations, I think, within our close-knit groups for having to be digital. And I liked find your niche where you can fit. Moving all these great ideas to action. Why are we even having this? Driving change in silos is hard. So, Sophie said that. So but this is why we're talking about all these partnerships, because ultimately we all agree that we want to drive change. Don't be afraid to learn by doing. That's a very engineer-like approach to things as well. And I think I liked the quick wins that you said at first, Steve, as well, because that can create motivation if you can find something right away that is a win. And I think making these relationships authentic, as Lenwood said, very much, being authentic in how you work with partners, especially if it's in a community, is quite important. So I think that's a summary, and this is perfect time to pass it back to Stephanie. This was, I think, a really great perspective from this panel for folks really wanting to engage more in the circular economy in all kinds of different ways, and how partnerships can help be a key for that.
Yeah, Jenna Jambeck, thank you so much for the summary, which I can't imagine how you sort of captured so articulately, and also just for moving us through such an interesting and I think wide-ranging conversation on how to make these things work. Thanks also to other Jenna and Lenwood and Seth and Sophie for all of your comments. Not to mention all of the work that you're doing outside of this this discussion that we're having today. So really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. We hope you'll join us for next week's session and the fourth and final in this series, which is on sustainability, investment and reporting, the road ahead. So that will be taking place same day and time, 1 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, the 24th, as part of Climate Week. And we is there, and then going forward in our 2021 programming, where we hopefully will take a lot of these themes and a lot of the input that all of the folks listening in have given us and will give us to make it into programming in our 2021 summit that we are hoping to still do in collaboration with National Geographic, pending a return to all being together again. If your question wasn't answered or you have additional kind of ideas that today's session has sparked, we hope you'll share them with us. We're going to send out a follow-up survey to collect some of that in the coming days, along with a playback to this and a couple of other things of note, including the speaker and registration details for next week's session. So look for that from us, and thanks again for all of your time and all of those on the panel today that shared some insights. We really appreciate it, and we are looking forward to the work to come. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.